just welcome.
Today?
Yeah.
Wonderful. Kata Māori te whakapō o ngā rangatira o ngā rohe. I'll do our karakia in English this morning. Heavenly Father, we beseech you this morning and ask that you draw down upon this room some shared wisdom, some collective patience, and some insight that we may deliberate together and draw forward some thoughts that will lead us into the future. We ask for your continued guidance and your peace upon us all on this day. Amen.
Gee, we might keep you on.
I charge for the ones in English, the ones in Māori are free.
So I want a special welcome to Api. He stood in for Mr. Mohi, and we asked if he would come back today since he had heard some of the submissions, and we'll value his point of view from a Tangata Whenua perspective on some of these issues, since Mr. Mohi is cannot be with us again today. So welcome, and also it might give us a bit of a Napier Council perspective as well on our decisions. So before we just go on, I just want to thank the councillors in the first instance for their patience and their hard work over the last 2 days. And this, when I took this home last night and said to my son, I'm going to try and read this tonight, he just couldn't believe that. He said, what about the last big pile you had? And I said, no, that's over here. So there's been a huge amount of reading, and I know that most of you have read these submissions right through and have valued the comment from our community. So secondly, just publicly want to thank our community who came in and took the time, the ones that took the time to write the submissions, because it does take a lot of time, and there was a lot of heavy stuff in some of those submissions. People had put in quality time, and it's worth us reading them and giving them due consideration. There were others that just put in a little bit, of course, just yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, but they still went to the trouble to do that, so I want to thank them as well. A special thanks to the people who attended. Apologies that we could only give some 5 minutes. It's just, if we were to give everyone 10 or 15, and if we'd ask questions, we would be here for 5 days, if not longer. So it is what it is, and I know it's not that successful, and it makes me think we've got to try and do something different, but I'm not sure what it is. So we have a big day in front of us.
Chair, sorry to interrupt, but I think we also have to acknowledge the efforts of staff who have to do all of this stuff on top of their normal
I always forget about them.
So.
Thank you guys for doing this huge job. And actually, my young 14-year-old son said, when he looked at this last night, he said, somebody has to write all this up. So I apologise I missed you out, because it is a huge amount of work on the huge piles of paper that gets done. It is just amazing that somebody has to sit down and pull all this together. So yeah, I do acknowledge the staff for doing their fantastic work.
Order, Chair. Also like to thank the people that attended all the town hall meetings that we had, the ones that turned up to it. There was over 400 people did that, which was really neat, and also all the people that contributed via social media and text. I know when the plan first came out, there was quite a bit of debate on social media, which was really cool to see people engaging, and mostly in a very respectful manner.
Yeah, you don't need a point of order for that, Paul. You can just start, and thanks for correcting me. Oh, Mr. Larker wants to correct me.
I'd like to thank the families of the councillors who had to put up with going into hibernation for a while to read our papers. They've all gone through this, and I'd like to thank all the others who are on the journey too.
Yeah, that is dead right. There's been a lot of people. Sorry, Debbie? Thank the ladies in the kitchen. Okay, so we'll get on with our meeting now. We've done all our thanks, but I am genuine on that, and I know, and thanks Paul for adding those other ones. Before we get going, because it's a continuation of our meeting, we just have one apology from Alan. He had to go off, and he'll be back 15 or 30 minutes late. So, and Mr. Mohi, apology for today as well. So, there's no conflict of interest today other than yours, Debbie, and we'll keep that on the register in terms of Cranford Hospice. Just the foundation trust, yeah. So when we come to that, we can consider, I think, I'd still like you to have a say on that. I actually think you should have a say on that, given that you are connected to it. As long as you declare the conflict and everyone understands that you are part of their foundation trust. It's a wonderful trust, it's a wonderful job you're doing there, and I don't think anybody would expect that you shouldn't have a say. So, let's move to the first paper today, which is the overview paper. Yes?
CLI for Tarangamarae. One of the submitters is Tarangamarae.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, yeah, you are.
so just registering an interest with Tarangamarae. Thank you.
Thank you, Happy. So we have the financial overview paper, and it is what it is. It is just a financial overview. So do we have somebody to move that we receive that paper? Moved by Councillor Barker, second by Councillor Hewitt. All those in favour?
Missed the opportunity to give my speech, but that's all right.
No. I know we're moving second and we have rules, but I still think we should have a speech from the throne. What do you want to say, James?
Oh, look, Chair, I was going to ask Jess to give a bit of an overview, but before doing so, I just wanted to also give my thanks to the staff for the enormous amount of work over the last 9 months on this. It's been a huge team effort right across the organisation, and I think the quality of the work has been outstanding. We put more effort this year into consultation on this long-term plan, I believe, possibly than has ever been done before, in terms of writing to every household, and the extent of participation in social media, public meetings, etc., which has been noted already, was pretty significant. And so while we did get a few comments from a few people that they didn't get all the information they wanted, my observation is that the level of debate and engagement in the community, not just on Hawke's Bay tourism but on the wider package, has been very high. A lot of coverage, a lot of discussion in the community, and so I think as you deliberate today, you can be confident that we've taken all reasonable steps to engage the community, provide them with adequate information, and you've had a lot of feedback. So I think you've got a strong foundation on which to have today's debate. I just wanted to comment on 3 things in particular that came out of the consultation, one of which was around the performance monitoring measures that we have alongside this plan. We do have some high-level quantitative goals that you set in the strategic plan leading into this process. I have spoken to you previously about my view that this organisation doesn't have an adequate performance monitoring program around its outputs and outcomes, and that's something that we will be seeking to build through this long-term plan process. There is funding proposed in the long-term plan for a new role, a principal advisor organisational performance, who will have a dedicated focus on measuring the outcomes this organisation delivers and reporting those through to you. Crucially, that role is part of the Office of the Chair and Chief Executive, and will be part of a cluster of activities around governance and media and community engagement that will ensure that you are better supported in terms of knowing what this organisation is delivering, and that we are communicating that more effectively to the community. There was also a bit of comment around the adequacy of the analysis in the consultation document. I would note that there was extensive documentation and the supporting information available on our website, and we did attempt to draw people's attention to that while striking a balance between having readily digestible information for the general public in terms of what we sent people and in terms of what was available in the background. We'd always like more time and resource to evaluate the pros and cons and provide you with greater levels of analysis, but I think if you look at the piles of paper in front of you, that's as long as a piece of string, really, and we always have to strike the balance between exercising some judgment and working off the information base we've got versus investing in a never-ending amount of analysis. And on that score, there has been some concerns raised about the extent of analysis we have around the spend on Hawke's Bay tourism. And I just note that it is an extraordinarily difficult task to evaluate or attribute particular visitor number and particular visitor spend to the generic brand promotion exercise conducted by Hawke's Bay Tourism outside the region. For us to evaluate precisely which dollar and which visitor came because of what investment would be a nigh on impossible task. So I do think there is scope for us to do stronger monitoring of Hawke's Bay Tourism contract, but our ability to evaluate that spend is inherently limited, and I just wanted to make that point. Final thing I wanted to say, very conscious of the impost of the proposed rate increase on the community, particularly fixed income households. That is something which obviously we gave considerable thought to in terms of designing the various different revenue streams in this long-term plan. It's obviously not just rate increases, and designing those in a way that was as fair and equitable across the community as possible. I think ultimately what a number of people in the community failed to understand through the consultation is that we're not consulting on doing a bit more of the same. This exercise is about substantially new and different services for this council, building off our existing services, expertise and experience, but it is different. And so we are asking the community to fund a greater level of activity, and therefore any suggestion that we should be living within a sort of a CPI level increase, I think fails to understand that we are proposing to do something very different here. And it was evident at some of the public meetings and some of the presentations and submissions that we heard that some people in the community believed that councils should only be essentially increasing their funding at a rate of inflation or thereabouts. And I think that fails to understand the fact that we need, for both legal reasons, national direction reasons and substantive regional performance reasons, to lift our level of activity to a higher level, and that comes at a cost. So whether or not we adequately explained that to the community, I felt like it was pretty clear and compelling. But there's still people in the community that show some resistance to this notion that regional councils around New Zealand need to do substantially more in terms of protecting and enhancing the environment. So that's all from me. Jess, have you got anything you wanted to add in terms of the kind of the fiscal context?
Not particularly. I was going to talk a little bit about the measures that we've put into place around performance monitoring and reporting, and our commitment, I guess, to improving and providing a greater level of detail to councillors and the community on those areas. I think the financial overview was really just to give a little bit of an overview of the journey that we went through in terms of pulling together the financial strategy. We did take a long look at all of our rating basis and policies, and particularly around the general rate. We spent quite a lot of time looking at the rating basis for the general rate and debating whether or not we should look at changing from land value to capital value, which was something that we decided it wasn't the right time to look at that within this consultation, but that's something that will be an ongoing conversation going forward, and we'll continue to review our rating differentials across the board through the next 3 years ahead of the next long-term plan. We also wanted to be quite transparent in this paper just around the number of staff, support staff, I guess, that we have included in the plan. So we've spoken a lot about the operational staff that will be out in the field on the ground doing things, but we have also included in the plan the provision for 8 staff internally, 6 within my area of corporate services. And that's really to provide the support and the foundations and the framework to enable that work to happen. It is quite a significant step up, but we are actually expecting to see a lot of people spread across the region. So we're looking at a decentralised model, I guess, of field staff, and that will put quite a bit of strain on the existing structure from internally providing support to those people. So We do think that we have provided for sufficient staff to support those people out and about to do their jobs, and it was important that we highlighted that to you today to make sure that you were sort of fully aware that we have included that level of staffing internally. In addition to those 6, we've included two new staff in the office of the Chief Executive and the Chair, and as James mentioned, that should really improve the capability of performance managing, monitoring and measuring across the organisation. That was really all I wanted to say. I think it's probably quite explanatory, self-explanatory in the paper in terms of the financial strategy. You know, we are requesting the community to contribute. Oh, we've got a question. Okay. Significantly through rates, but we are looking at a more aggressive investment strategy to support that revenue. We're looking at borrowing significantly across the 10 years, and we're also looking at an emphasis on user pays. So that sort of completes the package that provides the financial strategy to support this long-term plan.
There are 3 councillors, 4.
Well, I'm the mover of the motion.
Yeah, we have a mover and a seconder. So you want to talk to the motion, do you? No, I just want to
I was thinking, I'm reflection, I should move too quickly, I think it needs to be 1.3, like move them in.
We'll just take, we'll just hold and just, what's the question?
I just go to, in the paper at page 9, the table 26 and 27, we've got staff proposal for additional spend, and then we've got funding requests, the aggregate of those being 1.3 odd %. Can you tell me that's in addition to the 19%? So in adopting those changes or any other during the course of the deliberation?
Sorry, Neil, those tables are just an FYI in this paper. We're actually not asking you, so they'll be considered further down the deliberations today. So we've got.
No, I get that,
but they would be in addition.
Yes. The impact of them are that, plus any additions or changes to plan
as we go
will
through
add
today.
So you've constructed a rate impact table. There are other options, including deficit funding,
That's
loan
right.
funding.
Yes.
Those types of changes.
Yep.
So the process would we consider those, and prior to confirmation of the plan on the 30th of June, those alternatives would be explored and submitted. Is that how that would work?
Yes.
Yes.
Look, yes, although we would be hoping for Local Government Act and Local Government Rating Act reasons, we do need to adopt on the 30th, and so we would be looking for your resolution to the greatest extent possible today in terms of where you would like to see things land ultimately. If we do have questions that require further work, one possibility is that we bring that through the Corporate and Strategic Committee meeting mid-June before final adoption.
Yeah, I have I suppose it's a point of order really. There are 2 consecutive papers here. One's called Long-Term Plan Submissions Hearing Process, and the other's called Financial Overview, and we appear to be doing both of them at once. Can you clarify what's going on here?
Sorry, the first paper was resolved on the very first day of the of hearings.
Was it?
Yes, it was. It was considered and passed. Yes, correct.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
So we are dealing with item 6, not 5.
Correct.
Yes.
Chair, I have a question. Yes. Yep, thank you. Just hearing the submitters on the fixed income households and about the challenges that it may or may not create for them. At some stage, and I don't know whether we've considered in the past, but I'd like to see us have an option about perhaps having 2 payments a year or quarterly payments. Now the figure's actually getting up a wee bit, to assist those people in their cash flows. What effect that's going to have, what that would have on us.
We do have a number of people who pay on payment plans, whether that's weekly or monthly or quarterly. So we're happy to work with members of the community in terms of setting up payment plans for people.
Okay, so that's, to me, that's an issue then that needs to be communicated out at the time that the rate bill's sent out so that people are aware of that.
Yep. Thank you, Paul.
I've actually got two. Just looking at 19, paragraph 19, James, where you talk about the what do you call it, the OCEC. I'm slightly surprised that you wish to appoint a principal advisor performance and a manager of the OCEC. How big is this going to be, this entity? I would have thought that you would have wanted to manage it yourself.
So in terms of its composition, it has the HR manager and the HR advisor and a part-time HR advisor. It has a principal advisor organisational performance, it has a principal advisor governance, and it has the advisor governance as well, and it has a principal advisor communications. And so it's 6 or 7 people, so it's a reasonable sized team. I can't have each of those people reporting to me as well as all of the executive team, and so I do think it is something that requires a management role, and I think the management role will have a wider organisational function in terms of coordinating activity across the organisation and bringing information both to me, the executive, and also to this table about what's happening across the organisation on a weekly basis, but also on a periodic basis in terms of the performance monitoring, activity monitoring, etc. And so I think it's necessary, and I think it'll add an awful lot of value in terms of us collectively knowing what's happening across the organisation more in real time and being able to coordinate initiatives better across the organisation.
Okay, thanks. That's a really helpful explanation. The other query that I had was in regard to the hiring of extra space here in Napier for 25 people. And then I look at number 23, a shift towards greater decentralisation of staff, because, you know, what we're trying to do here is to actually employ people who are going to work more closely with the region. And I wonder whether those two aren't talking against each other, and whether we shouldn't be thinking more carefully about decentralisation, which is what I see as the principal function of the extra staff we're bringing on board.
So in the short term, it's both. One of the, so we've got sort of 3 field bases, if you like. So there's Wairoa, Central Hawke's Bay, but also this site is a field base. So we've got our hydro technicians operating out of here, we've got biosecurity staff, and we've got land management staff, all of whom operate in the field, based in this in this building here, which is why, of course, we've got plenty of utes and things that park outside overnight. One of the options longer term is that field-based staff in the central region or zone here move to Guppy Road. Guppy Road doesn't have any spare room at the moment, which is why, in terms of accommodating the growth in the short term, we are we've taken some space, and if we get time at the end of the day, I'd love to take councillors over there and show you. We've got a lovely set of offices over there. That's a very low cost and temporary solution as we think through whether or not a substantial redevelopment of Guppy Road is something that you wish to fund, or whether we just, for the indefinite future, continue to rent some space close by. So it is a bit of an and because this site does support field-based activity.
James, and you said you'll be looking to do refurbishments in Waipawa, but will you take a little bit more of a strategic view on that and consider whether is that the spot where you want to be enhancing, because it's, you know, it's not a great drop-in spot in Central Hawke's Bay. You may be far better off and more appreciated in the community if you look at something in Waipak, and you've got your office in Waipak as well. I'm not saying, I mean, you know, let's have a look at that, not decide it's Waipawa for.
Oh, look, absolutely. There has been, the work's already been undertaken, or is it being undertaken?
It's being undertaken now, but it's of a pretty low cost, so I think it's around $30,000 that we're spending. Yeah, just to have.
Well, that's right. We're getting some of the questions were Rick, you want to move this and you want an amendment. So you're talking about
when we come back to look at these things in the future, we will then have gathered up the lessons and made hopefully some improvements, and we'll have this as part of an ongoing review process and constant improvement. So that's my second element of the. People are happy with that. I haven't got a seconder, so. Happy with the way it is. It's all self-explanatory.
I just want to speak briefly to support the point that Councillor Bailey raised about the having a more affirmative approach to communicating payment options. And I had singled out submitter Cecile Herford, 359, who specifically she supported some of what we wanted to do, fully fund this, fully fund another thing. Sort of a balanced presentation. She said, look, I'm on a fixed income. I pay my district rates on a quarterly basis, but it happens to be in the 3 toughest months of the year, et cetera, et cetera. And she wanted a specific reply to that request. And I think, there were a lot of people who submitted who, some who didn't want to have a bar at all because it was just too much of a strain as they saw it on their fixed incomes. We all heard yesterday that fixed income can be a slightly misleading suggestion, but for some people that is a reality. It's real, and I don't see any reason why it's some bureaucratic chore for us, I suppose, but why we can't be much more welcoming of that kind of some alternative payment process, and I would definitely want to see us pursue that. And try to make this as bearable as it can be for folks in that situation. I also would suggest we have a local minister who is, I believe, is the revenue minister, and perhaps we ought to have a conversation there as well as to, what do we do in this situation? We're locked into a particular structure for raising these rates, which seems to me to have a built-in bias against, it's bound to inflict hardship on people who are least able to support local government activities. And somewhere along the line, I think the government has to take a look at what those constraints are on us and whether they can be restructured in some way. So I'd like to see us develop a point of view on that issue as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The only points I wish to raise around this paper and are well reflected in the 2 tables, 26 and 27, which indicate already that for approximately a $100,000 adjustment to the decisions we make today has a 0.5% increase in the general rate. I think that's important to note that already, if we adopted these recommendations from staff and accepted the submissions made to us on their face, we would be increasing our rate burden by 1.5% odd straight up. Any other decisions we make today, every $100,000 is a 0.5% increase in rates for the region. We've already heard the complaints about a 19% increase. We're already at 21.5. Everything on that is on top of that again.
that's a very good point. I think I'd just like to comment on Tom's point as well, because we saw fixed income yesterday. Some people really are going to struggle, and we know that in Wairoa some people are really going to struggle. Other people on fixed income aren't going to struggle so much because they have independent income as well. But if you're just living off the government advances, then you would struggle in life, let alone struggle paying extra rates. So I am cognizant of that as well, and we do need to look for a way through that somehow. And as to your point, Neil, I mean, looking at all these things, of course, we're discussing them later. They are all wonderful things, and we could make a much longer list of equally wonderful things, but we just can't do everything. And so at moments like that, you've got to push back to your core competency and say, what is our role? Because we just can't continue to go back to our ratepayers for every good endeavour that's out there, even though they are really good. So we need to be conscious of that today. But of course, this paper doesn't. This paper just highlights that. So we have a mover. Any other speakers? We have a mover and a seconder. Oh, sorry.
We need to take the amendment first.
So we move the. Yeah, I thought that they put.
Been moved and seconded, hasn't been voted on.
Yeah, including the amendment.
Hewitt has, Councillor Hewitt moved the
Councillor Hewitt later
initial.
said that she thought she was moving second number 5. I took it from that. She thought she was moving number 5, then she was withdrawing from it. So I then saw the seconder and Benton said he was keeping the breach, and here we are.
So everyone's aware of the amendment. It was up on the board. It's a very good amendment. All those in favour? Against? It's carried. So we're up to item 7. And who is going to talk to this? Liz, will you talk to this?
Thank you,
everyone has read it, Liz. So
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It will be very brief, and good morning, councillors. This particular paper, item 7, is in response to the comparatively small number of submissions that were received around the regulatory group of activities, but nevertheless there were some particularly relevant points made to those. A number of those had concerns about or issues really around the process, which is actually outside the scope of this long-term plan. It's under the scope of the Resource Management Act. But in general, there was support for greater attention that we give to the role of protecting the environment, and a recognition that in order to be able to do that, we needed to be able to have the necessary tools, which includes additional staff, in particular in this case, around our resource consents, compliance monitoring, science and planning. So, Mr. Chair, I'm going to take you at your word that everyone's read that. But I'm happy to answer any questions.
yeah, are there any questions to Liz? Benton's looking. He's left it in Wairoa. Here he goes.
Yeah, 9.71 forestry slash. You know, we need to focus on that more. I get it, but without supporting legislation or regulation, can you explain to me how the extra money is going to help us actually give it some
So
teeth?
there is actually additional regulation which has just come into effect on the 1st of May, the National Environment Standard for Plantation Forestry, which will, so the photo, for example, that the Mayor of Wairoa had in his presentation yesterday, exactly that type of situation is that which is the NES targets, and which additional compliance monitoring will give us the ability to deal with more effectively.
But you need to explain that further, because with how does that then relate to the you know, I didn't get my question into the good Mayor of Wairoa, but actually it's his district plan that has allowed all that to happen. So how does it tie in with all the other regulations?
So in the case of the NES for plantation forestry, so if we go back to when that forest was planted, or look at potential replanting of that particular slope, the NES has a risk assessment framework, and it looks at slope susceptibility as the key driver for whether or not a piece of land is replanted. So in that particular case, it's potentially unlikely that there will be forestry put back on that slope. So looking ahead, that's going to address the avoidance of any repetition of that. In that particular instance there, all forestry is now required as of the 1st of May to provide us with a harvest management plan, and we have the ability to go and ensure compliance monitoring with that. So those are the kind of tools that we now have that we haven't had in the past that should be able to assist.
Just before I come to you, Rick, I'd just like to say, Fenton, in that particular case in Wairoa, we had a lot of residents complaining to us, and we finally got to send some staff up there to have a look and talk. We want to be able to hit those things quicker. When someone is clearly breaching the new regulations, we want to be on the site much quicker than we were in that case. So that's about putting more staff into Wairoa so we can react.
Will they be compliant?
Well, some of them will be, yeah. Rick?
I'm happy to move points 1, 2 and 3 and make the note that by having staff with some capability, this council could not only hit the places we required, but I would hope they would be in the 30 years leading up to harvest, talking to those who are planting the forests and telling them what the regulations are required, what they have to do, so they're planning well in advance so we don't actually have to hit them at the last minute. So
we have a mover who's already spoken, which is pretty moving along the process. A seconder. Rick, you've already spoken. Do you need to speak any more? Neil? I'll be sorry. Paul? You look so much like Neil.
Thank
Paul?
you. Oh, good grief.
Paul?
Good grief. I'd just like to say to you, I'm really, really pleased to see this particular part of the long-term plan come about. It was something that when I stood for council that I wanted to see happen, so it just fulfils that obligation. Thank you.
Are there any other speakers?
Well, Mr. Chair,
Neil?
you've denied me the opportunity to raise a question, and if I could indulge you to do so at this point. My question is...
Oh, sorry, did I miss your hand up?
Yes, you did. I'll forgive you.
Yeah,
You're from Havelock North, I'll forgive you. I just wondered, Liz, whether you could help me with the fees charged, particularly in relation to local authorities' recovery for monitoring their consents, monitoring and all around that. What's our regime there, and can we? I note, for example, what the reference in one of the submitters around the discharges into the estuary, and wondered what we can do to increase the vigilance by the consent holder around their discharges and overall contamination discharge.
So in terms of the costs recovered, we charge the consent holder for the monitoring of their consent. In terms of the latter part of your question, that would really be addressed through a review of consent conditions. We could, I believe, and without seeing a set of consent conditions in front of me, or having a specific example, I think any increased monitoring by the consent holder could be achieved through requiring it through a change to consent conditions or relevant conditions on a new consent if it was when it was issued. But that's really the mechanism, I think, to be able to address that.
Sorry, can I just add that what's not contained in here but will be in the final long-term plan for adoption are the changes to cost recovery for Section 36 charges, environmental monitoring charges that were agreed and part of the detailed consultation, and included in that is bringing in monitoring charges for marine discharges, and currently the territorial authorities are not being charged Section 36 monitoring charges for their marine discharges, for the outfalls and the outfall to the estuary. So the intent is to bring charges to bear on that. So that is part of this package.
Sorry, supplementary to that, have you factored those extra charges or potential charges into this, into the current?
Into the revenue, yes, it has. Yes.
Sorry, I missed your question there. So we do have, now we have mover and a seconder, and they've both spoken. Do we have anyone else who wish to speak?
Mr. Chairman,
Alan?
I've just got a query on the
Another
point
query.
that
Sorry, I'm really...
Councillor Curtin is making. What, in fact, are the rights of the consent holder if the council wishes to or intends to alter their consent conditions, particularly given that the issue that we're talking about is a national problem, not a local problem?
So the, we as the consent authority have the ability to review consent conditions and call in a consent to do that, and the consent holder has the right to appeal to the Environment Court.
And they have all their common law rights.
Do we have any other speakers? We have mover and a seconder for 1, 2 and 3, which is agreeing to the 2.9. All those in favour? Aye. Against? It's carried unanimously. Item 8, land, water, biodiversity, incentives to change. This is a biggie. Who's taking this paper for it? Ian. Oh, Ian. Briefly, Ian.
Very briefly, Chair.
It's been read.
It's been read. It's close to 400 submissions. Very, very difficult to try and bring together a response to all of them, obviously. So what I've provided you is my view of the key themes or issues that come out of those submissions, which I think were relatively consistent in a number of them. Ability to pay and who pays is obviously something you've heard a lot about over the last 2 days. Scale and pace, there's differing views on that. Some submitters are challenging the evidence base for the need for this, which staff would consider as probably beyond challenge. We don't think there's a lack of evidence around the issues that we're seeking to address and where we would seek to address them. Perhaps the issue has been that we haven't made that visible enough, and so that's something for us to note and do better at. And then just linking in regulation to support this activity in time, which has certainly always been our intent, that this activity is largely non-regulatory, and that my view of success will be in future that the regulator comes to these catchments and there's nothing for them to do, because everything that needs to be done has been done, and the regulation simply props that up and supports the existing activity. And then finally, the point that absolutely we will be seeking to leverage and crowd in whoever we can into this space to make it grow. If I can take one of your dollars and realise $20 of benefit by crowding others in, I'll do exactly that.
Right, questions for Ian. Fenton, and then Alan.
Thank you, Chair. When you go to recommendation 3, I'm assuming it's interest-free loans for farm plans, or are we just going to load them up? Did we have a look at that? Yeah, right. Okay, that wasn't my question actually, Chair. I haven't seen any data or detail on social impact in certainly small town north of here for with reforestation. I haven't seen the scope of the work that's being done. I'm not trying to put anyone on the spot, but I'm struggling to support this when in my view, we don't know the consequence socially of doing it.
Absolutely, and so there is a body of work that we're kicking off with a local economist to look at the impact or the changing economy that would come out of a changed landscape on a catchment like Wairau. I mean, it's very hard to predict exactly what that would look like in terms of a final proposition, because this activity isn't going to occur overnight. It's going to take a long time, potentially many decades, to get to a final point where the issues that need to be addressed have been addressed. We're absolutely mindful that a change in land use and a change in land activity has an impact on the social dynamic and fabric within a community, and there's plenty of views out there around the risks of catchments that are currently in pastoral-based farming becoming primarily tree-based, and the impacts on people and communities. And it's really hard to tell you exactly what the final outcome would be for any catchment. Fair to say, though, that staff consider that there are sufficient alternative land uses that aren't pine trees, because we're not out there as a group of people looking to sell pine trees, but looking to reforest the right tree in the right place for the right reason, and that could be poplar and willow poles, and continued pastoral farming around that. It could be manuka with continued industry activity associated with that. It would be impossible for me right now to give you a picture of what the Wairau catchment looks like in 10 years' time after this, because we simply don't know what the level of uptake will be by landowners, what their preferences will be in terms of the changes they want to make, because we need to be really clear here. We're not turning up telling people what to do. We're simply creating an opportunity for change and asking if they would like assistance or support with that, financial support, technical support, to make those changes. They may choose to make no changes at all. They may choose to make wholesale changes. Virtually impossible to predict.
Alan.
But we are doing some economic assessments, and my apologies, I did promise to get you the scope and I haven't. I'll do that now.
Alan, then Tom.
Well, my question follows on, and that is it intended that there should be a framework of rules that would apply if this concession or incentive is offered to a landowner? Because clearly, if it's simply going to mean that a landowner can plant some of his best paddocks close to the road, which means that it's accessible for harvest, but it locks that land up for 25, 30 years and removes it, in effect removes good pastoral farming land. That's in my mind is a negative.
Tom, then Rick.
And it's defeating the purpose.
Sure. So it's a good question, and to be absolutely crystal clear that this funding is not for commercial forestry. So if people are looking to commercially forest their best flats nearby in a paddock, that's not what this money would ever be used for. This is for the places that people don't want to go. This is for the areas where commercial operators don't want to exist. It's to support things like poplar and willow planting, space planting, to control gully erosion, sheet erosion, slip erosion on hill faces. The commercial afforestation is a separate piece of work that will come back to you in time. The other point I'd make is that we are currently developing a grant policy. So how will we spend the money? What are the rules around that? We will bring that back to you for your input very, very soon. So that's literally in progress now. And you will have good visibility of that and input to it, so that you are confident about that you have a clear understanding about how we're proposing to spend that money.
Okay, that's fine. Sorry, secondary question. There's no indication here that I can see. Unfortunately, I've left my folder behind. I rush over to the hospital. I bought the wrong one. Of the rate implication of this one.
That's the table in the front, Chair.
Yeah, it's not in this one.
Not number 3, financial impacts or implications.
1.9.9, 2.2. Okay.
Now, Tom, then you, Rick.
Yeah, I just wanted to be sure. It seems to be stated as such in the discussion. In point, found it somewhere, 8 or 9 here. This is the portion of the budget that is dealing with the augmentation of the land management staff and plans for deployment of it around the region and so forth and so on. Is that correct?
Yes, it includes the additional staff required to do the job.
So that's what my understanding was, and it didn't seem like the numbers were very high, actually. Is this the incrementals? What is this? This doesn't seem to be the
Jess can probably speak to it, Peter, but there's a proposal for a little loan funding of this. There has been a repurposing of existing funding to cover the staff costs, the initial build-up, so we haven't just added to the costs by adding new staff and not taking money out. So existing money is being used to recruit or to pay for the new recruits. And then the funding that flows is the funding for the physical works on the ground, all the farm plans.
All right. Okay.
Rick?
Bear with me, Chair. I want to give notice of an amendment to the recommendation, pick up some of the comments that people have made, and particularly pick up on the comment that was directed at you and I when we were in Wairau, and the people there were picking up on the metaphor, the image that Fenton's often said they had of this Roger Dickey coming in, buying the farm, stuff all the things, and leaving, planting on all the good land, and then leaving the place wrecked. And it's the sentiment we picked up on some of the emails we've had. And I thought we'd need a new 5-2-4 to add to the recommendations here, and I'm happy to move it. In making this decision, Council takes all steps to ensure that productive farmland remains in production, maintaining the local economy, and the planting program be targeted those lands which pose a greater risk of erosion, and the social and economic interest of the areas concerned well measured and considered to be full final decisions made on HBRC planting program, which are sort of things that Ian has said all the way through, and we have understood, but we've never expressed directly. And I think that's something we need to say, this is what we're doing, express it clearly and emphatically, otherwise we're going to get misunderstood.
I think it's a very good addition. You would second that addition, so can we just write? Yeah. Yeah.
So that would be, I'd move 1, 2, 3 without addition 4.
Before we jump to the move, are there any more questions on this for Ian? Yeah, let's sit there. Are there any more questions?
I'm just intrigued to see the
Remember, we up on it. I've sent it to the end.
Can we
I've sent it to the end, so put it, let's give it time. You probably need a bit more wordsmithing, but the sentiment's there.
Peter?
Not so much a question as a comment, Chair. When we're considering this, I'm very mindful of the comment that Garth Hiles made when he made his submission about the critical importance for the success of this, for us to get farm advisors through the gate and be talking to people on the ground. So the staffing this with the right people is just so important.
It is definitely.
Absolutely agree, Chair, and that's at the heart of the proposal. Absolutely.
Do you want to comment, Ben?
No question. Just to help me with this question through you, Chair, to the CFO, the loan, drawing down the loan will happen as and when necessary. So, in effect, the 1.9% may not be reached in the first year, correct?
That's
Thank
correct.
you.
Initially in the
Well, I
first
can
years,
support that.
that's
That's a
largely
very good
OPEX
point.
costs in terms of staffing. Servicing the loan will ramp up over
Okay,
time.
we have a mover for that, and who was the seconder? Tom. We have a mover and a seconder, including the amendment. Do you wish to talk further? Tom, do you wish to speak?
Yeah, I just think this is one of the most fundamental changes of direction that we're making, and would echo Peter's point that a number of the submitters from all quarters, whether they were from the farming sector itself or advisors that we heard from and so forth, everyone has talked about the fact that one-to-one engagement is the essential ingredient of making progress here, because most of the progress has to be made, all the progress has to be made, I should say, on a property-by-property basis. And the steps required to make progress, whether that is greater farm productivity or whether it is better environmental mitigation or whatever, is a farm-by-farm decision at the end of the day. And if we're going to provide guidance as to how that best be done, and that is a role that everyone seems to feel is missing in the equation at the moment, then to me this goes absolutely to the heart of what we need to achieve to meet our comprehensive goals in this sector, and the comprehensive goals include social, economic, and environmental, so I think this is really perhaps the most important thing we're doing in this long-term plan.
Thank you, Chair. Just to reinforce a note of caution, the Wairoa Innovation Ag Expo had MPI there alongside our staff. Well, actually they were across the tent, and they were promoting planting some of your better land if you were going into production forestry. Now, admittedly, they're on a journey, and they don't have perhaps the necessarily expertise or the bigger vision, if you like, yet. but I found that a little disconcerting. To reinforce that point, Landcorp, now called PAMU, since they've had their environmental committee of Messrs Joy and Salmon and Co, have seemed to have become a bit of a secret society. They're planting 2,000 hectares up in the back country there. Two families are gone this year, and they're planting their better country in production forestry. So, you know, you talk about the lessons being learned. If you actually want to plant a decent pine tree and grow a decent pine tree, you've got to plant it in a pretty good spot. Now, we're not advocating that, I get that, but you just got to be aware that there's some competing pressures around this whole plant the billion trees deal, and 2,000 hectares and 2 families gone doesn't sound much, but it's the beginning of another Dickey invasion, if you want my view. So I'm happy to support this at this stage, safe in the knowledge, as has been explained, that the money may not be drawn down this year and the 1.9% may not eventuate this year. And I find that reassuring, and the fact is we're going to do a hell of a lot more work around the impacts of this stuff going forward. But, you know, let's keep our eyes open here, guys, because this is, you make your decision once and then you've got 30, if it's a production forest, you've got 25, 30 years to wait. If it's not production forest and it's actually long-term Manuka carbon sink, etc., it's a longer game. And there are impacts, I don't care what you say about it. So just keep our eyes open.
Fenton, I want to go back to questions, but I just want to comment. There are impacts on the way we do things, no matter from a raft of areas. And forestation is one. Disruptive influences in the marketplace, which I suggest are going to come a lot faster than we think, are another. Corporate farming, I visited a little school in Central Hawke's Bay that had a roll of 120 students. It went down to 79, they lost a teacher, and then it went down to 24, and no one looks after the school hall, no one looks after anything around the school, not a forestry tree in sight. So there's a whole lot of things that bringing pressure to our rural communities that we need to be cognizant of, and it's not just reforestation. We need to think much smarter about how we do a lot of things. Next question.
Thank you, Chair. If we could have the wording of the... It's actually a debate. The wording back up? Well, that's what I want to debate. Leanne, have you got...
I thought she got, she hadn't got that.
It's all disappeared on us.
While we're waiting for that, Debbie, do you want to speak? Well, and then you're there, Paul.
Yeah, I just have some concerns about the wording of the amendment about, because how do we, you know, whilst I get the intent, absolutely, I absolutely agree with that. I would have concerns about something which talks about tactical steps to ensure that productive land remains production, because you go, what is productive land? Because 2 sheep to the hectare to some person's view would be productive, whereas we may differ on that. And maintaining the local economy sounds like it's business as usual. I think that, to my mind, it's a little bit, it sends a confusing message. Well, that's what's to my mind, but that's okay. But nevertheless, I'll still support it because I understand the intent. So, but I just wanted to put on record that I'm not going to get hung up on the wording.
Yeah. We get that. Debbie?
Thank you. I'm very relaxed with the, well, not the amendment, the additional number 4, but Ian, I'd like to acknowledge you, sorry to interrupt, I'd like to acknowledge you because, as you know, I have really struggled with a bit of this this aspect of the long-term plan, and you have taken me on the journey, and we've had many discussions, so thank you for, you know, just helping me along there. One of the things that I was most concerned about was a coastal strip that goes from Waimarama down to Blackhead, and severe erosion, and I kept saying, how can you show me that you are going to be able to affect change in these most vulnerable areas? And Ian has shown me that way after many discussions, so So I'm grateful. One of the unfortunate things, and I think it's quite a poor reflection in comms actually, is that our comms team went out and said to the Central Hawke's Bay community that some of the benefits in the upcoming year are going to be incentives to farm environment plans, and I think that's been quite misleading, because in actual fact the deadline for the farm environment plans is the 31st of May, as we all know, in the Tuki catchment. So that has been a bit of a false promise, and I think that we should be really clear to be really careful to be honest with the community, because things like that just don't go down well. Part of the inequity of Central Hawke's Bay already having to have stumped up that money, and once again been the we seem to take all the lessons on these national policy statement for freshwater management. They come our way first because we were the first cab off the rank. So I'm aware that things go in swings and roundabouts, but just to flag that Central Hawke's Bay hasn't come out quite like the other catchments in terms of this opportunity. But overall, once again to acknowledge you, Ian, and to get farmland into production forestry, you have to have willing farmers to agree as well, so it may not be as easy as some people around this table think.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers? You're the last, you're a mover, aren't you? Yeah, so I'm going to come to you, but I just want to say something myself. Yeah. Thanks, Debbie, for acknowledging Ian, and I also want to do that. Ian, you've been tower of strengths. You've just actually moved on this, and you said about a year ago, maybe even longer, that we needed action, and you did turn up to a couple of meetings, which I always thought was great, and you just went out there and got trees planted. And that's what we need here. That's what this is about. I 100% agree with Tom's assessment of this. This is one of the most important things we're going to do. We are going to put 36 million aside for all these riparian plantings. We are not looking for a financial return on this capital, so it is not about our reforestation program. So that debate has come in, but it's not. This is about gullies and difficult bits of pieces of land that we're going to get into. Ian shared with me an email from a farmer in Wairau last night, which I read while I was reading all this as well. A guy, Dave Reed, I think his name was, and I thought it was an outstanding email representing his community and representing his industry, of that there is definitely, we need to go forward on this, and it's all the points you were talking about, Fenton. We need to go forward on this in a really rational way. We need to go forward to maintain existing industries and protect existing industries while we do this, and don't be stupid about it. So I thought it was a really good letter from him, and Ian should share it with all of you. Whilst we're in this debate, I got a text from one of the largest growers on the Heretaunga Plains, who's meeting one of our staff, meeting Anthony, in the field, and I'll quote a little bit about it. He said, "We will plant and look after our stretch of the Karama this winter, and power to it. We'll do all the weeding. We're going to do everything. Not only that, we're going to publish it and challenge all other growers on the banks to take on a portion of the Karamu. Love your staff." So we do actually have a community that's embracing this enormous endeavour, but we also have industry in Wairau and on the Heretaunga Plains and in Central Hawke's Bay that are saying, thank goodness we are finally doing this. It's a great endeavour, and our community's with us on this, and you know, it is really great that we're going forward on it. So Rick, you have the last statement.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I feel that I've been a little bit remiss in just putting up the amendment and not speaking to it, because Paul, if one thing, did highlight the fact that it wasn't entirely clear what the amendment said. We thought we knew about it, but in the future someone will go back and say, what did they mean by that? So I want to take time to lay out exactly what it is we mean by this resolution. But before I start, I want to take two things. Firstly, I want to highlight the point that you've made, Chair, on several occasions, that in doing this work on riparian margins and so on, we're saying to the community, no one is at fault here. People went in the past, they chopped all these trees down, took it all away. We're not pointing blame at anybody and making responsibility, we're taking it on collectively. And that's what this represents. And I think that is a really important statement of values when we look at what this resolution means. I would also then come back to pick up Tom's point. Of all the things we are doing, this is probably the most important one of all. It signals a clear step change of direction this council's taking. And for me, it started when we went on the tour And we were up in northern part of our region, and a farmer pointed to us a steep hill at the back of his thing, which was slumping down, and said, you know, I've got all this hill erosion here, I'm a wit's end. And I said to him, why don't you plant it in Manuka? To which he said, what? I just had it cleared to increase my production. Cost me a lot of money. Well, we stood there, and what we looked around was all these flats, and when you looked at the farms in the area, you could see that they had divided it up and given each farm a reasonable amount of flat, then a lot of steep hill country. And no one could make enough money on the flats. They had to do the hills to get the production, to get the money to live. And the farm wasn't actually a very profitable farm, you can see by the year. And the discussion was, well, maybe if we took a number of farms, amalgamated them, put the flats and the easy stuff into a farm and put the trees on the rest, we would have a better outcome. This is sort of the logics in this. The second thing which comes about it is that we're saying to the community, in response to what we've heard, and Fenton has reflected this, as we did in Warwick, that people are worried that we're simply going to be focused on planting trees and not doing the thinking about what the effect is on the community and the local economy and the society. Well, this resolution here says that we have to make a measured decision about that. It is a judgment, not a determination. And when we talk about productive farmland, well, we're not going to say what it is or isn't, but we're going to measure farm production against it with the economy, the local people, social issues, and make a considered decision. This is not going to be just simply carpeting an area with trees. We're going to be thoughtful and deliberate about this, and we're going to engage with the communities. That's what we're saying here, and I think we have to make that really clear, and that's what we're doing. We're going to be measured and considered before a final decision is made, take into account community aspects, farm production, etc. This is a package. We have to do this. And we have to have this resolution, in my view, to be able to communicate this to the public. We are not going to be mindless about this and simply plant trees because we can. We're going to do it as a whole total package with the community, which reflects what Rex's point is in terms of the text that came in about the caribou. We need the community to be with us, because if we do, we will succeed. If we don't, we won't. It's as simple as that. And this is a reach out to the community to say we've heard them and we're going to act accordingly.
Thank you, Rick. We have a mover and a seconder, and we included 4, so we have 1, 2, 3, and the new 4. All those in favour? Aye. Against? It's unanimous. Thank you very much, councillors. We have item 9, and item 9 is James. Oh, Ian? Ian again.
So, thank you, Chair. So look, very briefly, close to 400 submissions. Interesting that there was I think a blurring between the previous topic and this topic for many submitters. Similar themes had come out of it, which I won't repeat. The key points of difference here were concerns raised around our ability to manage the planted areas from grazing animals, deer and goats, which is something that as staff we're very, very aware of, and it's sort of keeping us awake at night, if you like, that absolutely we get the significance of this as an issue. Just noting that the grant policy will will speak to that, so you'll have an understanding that there are some obligations we'll be wanting the landowner to pick up as part of the deal, and that there are enhanced provisions within the regional pest management strategy to deal with things like goats in particular, and additional funding and resourcing for that coming through the LTP. I'd also make the point that we see our best sort of view on that at the moment, and that we will adapt and respond as we see things change in the future. So if we see that it's not working or it's not effective, we'll be coming back to you to talk about that. We may be coming back to you to seek further tools to allow us to do the job, but it's absolutely something that we've got in focus as it relates to the previous topic. And then the Future Farming Trust, so there were varying views around that. Some of the concerns raised were particularly that it was going to be a body that was going to tell them how to farm, and it was going to be a group of people who were not what you might consider mainstream farming people, who would not connect to the mainstream farming community that we were seeking to influence. And I think all of those things are potential risks, but we're reminded that the proposal was for an independent farmer-led, grower-led group. It's not something that staff will be populating. It will be populated by the farming and growing community. It's their initiative, so it's got to be self-selecting. As council, I think we should be putting clearly to that group that there's an expectation that they have funding to get themselves stood up and working, and that in the future they would be looking to wipe their own face and feed themselves down the track through funding and support through others, potentially with some council funding, but probably not at the level that you're proposing. And that we would put in clear expectations from that trust, KPIs if you like, for them to deliver on back to you for your investment. So I think all of those things are possible. I'm happy to take questions, Chair.
Chair, just before we do, can I just add 2 quick points? Leverage of funding by others was a key plank of this partnership package of proposals, and I just thought I'd note that on the biosecurity side of things, so we've been seeking to leverage substantial funding into the region from Predator Free New Zealand. The discussions with Predator Free New Zealand, Predator Free 2050, are now in their very advanced and closing stages. It would have been ideal if we could have brought to you today a final funding decision from them, but it's a little chicken and egg because they need your funding confirmed before they can confirm theirs, etc. But I can give you some confidence that we have in all probability, a funding package from them. And the other area where we were seeking to leverage funding was through the newly formed Biodiversity Trust to become the Hawke's Bay Biodiversity Foundation, and I'm told that there was a good number of people signing up to contribute and come alongside us at the launch event 2 nights ago, and a lot of enthusiasm and momentum around that. So I think you can have every confidence that an investment into this biodiversity effort regionally will be well supported by the community and will make our dollar treble, if not quadruple, in impact.
Thank you, Fenton.
So 2 questions, Chair. First one, if you go back a few years, we used to have good old Paul Drury with his abacus out, and he would keep us up to speed on where the rate increase was sort of heading throughout the day. Can I just ask if that's possible, not now, but maybe over the smoko break?
Manton's sitting there doing precisely that,
So
and we can put it up at some stage. If,
is that why Manton looks so worried at the moment? No.
I was just playing Tetris.
No, it's a very good idea, and we've discussed it before. And
well, we have. That would be useful for me, but I just have a question around the Future Farming Fund. The 150,000 the first year. What will that be spent? Like setting up? What is that? Settling the deed, and is that paying trustees, or what does that look like? What does that do?
Yeah, I mean, you have to form a trust like that. There's a reasonable amount of administration to pull it together and give it a deed and
I've formed quite a few trustees, and it's not 150 grand. I can tell you right now.
Yeah. Well, they also then, once they're up and running, need to have some money to spend. So it's no good forming them and having no resource to do anything.
I tend to disagree with that too. I've done a few.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I wonder, Ian, you could just help me a little bit in terms of the breakout of the biodiversity biosecurity totals, the 744,000. Just remind me the allocation towards Biodiversity Foundation is what?
So the foundation was, Desiree, 450?
It's 200 for the endowment fund.
200 for the endowment fund and 200 for our own expenditure.
Yeah, and then 150 for the project management.
Correct. Yeah. So it's $200 going into the endowment fund for the Biodiversity Foundation.
Each year?
Each year.
Yes.
There's $200,000 of operational spend.
Yes.
So what we've done is undertaken a zonation piece of work which helps us identify biodiversity hotspots in the region. So areas where our catchment initiatives, the previous topic, are not addressing, but there are high value biodiversity sites. We've got cash available to spend on those, and then $150,000 for the project manager to assist the trust and the foundation with its work.
The partnership quantum is 200,000 for the foundation. That's
200,000 for the foundation plus the project manager.
Plus the project management. And the balance?
Is the $200,000, or will there be biodiversity money in there? And look, so whatever the balance is left is biosecurity related.
Biosecurity related,
Sorry.
yes. Okay. I wonder, Mr.
Another question?
Well, I just wanted to foreshadow, in addition to the recommendations, which I understand Tom's going to move shortly, but I just want to foreshadow that.
Okay, well, do you want to do that now, or do you want to wait till questions are over?
Oh, questions at first.
Yeah, there's 2 questions.
Thanks, Rex. I note that the expenditure, the majority of expenditure in this area, which has been for biosecurity and biodiversity, has not been controversial. The controversy has been over the proposal for a future farming initiative. And in addition to the concerns through our submission process that you mentioned in relation to telling farmers what to do, there was also concerns raised around duplication of this initiative with what's already happening with farmer organisations such as Beef and Farm and so forth. And I'm really conscious of the fact that there is some negativity around this proposal. So I'm wondering if we shouldn't, and this is a question to you, if we shouldn't consider directing this effort towards catchment or sub-catchment management as opposed to pure farming techniques and technology, because that's an area, it seems to me, that's going to become of increasing importance. It certainly means signalled to us through the tank process. That's where the farmers are heading in that area, and I think it's something that we should be trying to do in the Tukituk area as well. So I'm interested in your comments on that.
Absolutely right. There's a risk in all these exercises of duplication, and it's something that I think you would want to have reflected in your, I'd call them KPIs. So what are your expectations from the trust given the funding you're providing to them? So where do you want to see them focus their efforts, and what outcomes or outputs do you want from your investment? If you're asking whether they could be a group that provides the catalyst or nucleus for catchment groups or catchment clubs, possibly. There is a risk though that if Beef and Lamb New Zealand released their latest strategy just in the last few weeks, they're very clear they see themselves working in that space as well, that forming catchment collectives and working with farmers within catchments to do that is something that they would see they've got a responsibility for. Certainly something the tank process has identified that they want to have happen. I think there's probably many things you could get the trust to do. I would suspect it's probably less about the social elements, the social science elements of it, and more about the practice and the practice change that you'd want to have them focus. Remind you that within the LTP there is provision for us to be co-investing with the University of Waikato in a professorial chair that's going to have a role to look at the social science, the people elements of catchments and catchment management, and landowner motivators and influencers. So that's a piece of work that we're doing, and I wouldn't want to see that trust going down the same route and duplicating our efforts. I think they would be best focused on the practice change, the innovation, the cutting edge stuff, the bleeding edge stuff that might be relevant to deal with all of the issues that have been raised around moving catchments from the current mix of land uses and activities and into a future, what that looked like and how that could work, the risks, the limitations, the options, the success factors.
Yeah, just at the risk of complicating this a little bit more, it's just occurred to me there's something which we probably haven't been as clear with councillors about as we could have, and that is that in recent times the regional land care scheme has been used to fund bits of research, innovation related research, and to give you an example of that, we provided funding alongside central government and industry good organisations into some research around plantain and chicory as a way of managing drought and providing better forage performance for farmers. Now, part of funding the changes to the integrated catchment management group and the incentives for change that we had in our last item has been some repurposing of funding, including the Regional Land Care Scheme. So we're putting our effort into where we see our core concerns around water quality, so that's where the riparian fencing, planting, what have you. And so our core emphasis as a council is going on to that, and therefore our discretion to have funding to put into those sorts of projects has actually been reduced as part of this proposal. And this is where the Future Farming Trust comes in, I think, because then it gives us a farmer-led vehicle to do some of that more innovative research, and certainly again to crowd in funding from the likes of MPI, Crown Research Institutes, etc., into Hawke's Bay specific science and research and adoption on farm in those areas where we won't have as much flexibility, because your core folk are going to be focusing very hard on those water quality impacts.
Now, we have lots of people with their hands up, and we're still in question time, so can you keep your questions brief, and can we keep the answers brief, because there would appear to be on this subject that was a mistake. I thought we could do it in 30 minutes, but we appear not going to. So we start with Debbie, and then we'll go to Fenton, and then back to you, Alan. Very good idea.
Thank you, James. Given that, a huge number of people that I respect hugely in the primary sector in Hawke's Bay have given opposition to the future farming, and I'm also well aware that you're being tapped from people in the community for jobs in that space, for some people who are unemployed. That can we please take that future farming initiative separately to the other voting? No,
Sorry?
well, it's in here. It's included in future farming biodiversity.
Oh, is that that we do it separately? No, I think that's probably a good idea, Debbie. So you're going to recommend we do that separately? Thomas, okay, no, thank you for that. Fenton, then back to Alan.
Well, just to say, you know...
Question?
Question, but just to say through you, question to the CE. There you go, thank you, Chair, keep me in line. What would the impact be of deferring the payment for a year? So take the 150k out, but still work it up, which we can do. I could support it if we did that, because to me there's not enough meat on the bones yet. I can't support it as it is here. So what would the impact be of taking the 150k out? I mean, $100 you settle a trust, Christ, it's not that hard.
It was 0.7% of the rate increase would be the
Forget
impact.
about the rate increase. I'm just, can we physically, would it hamper the construction of the trust?
Look, we could, within existing resources, establish the trust. I guess the difficulty would be establishing something that then has no working capital, essentially, to do anything with for a period, and that wouldn't be available under that proposal for another 12 months. So we wouldn't be rushing to establish the trust, given that it wouldn't have any working capital for a year. So that would be the impact.
We could, and that will come up in the vote, I guess. It could do that.
Apply to a trust with due respect, and you get
no, but they want to bring people together, and
but you can still get that.
Yours is it's a clear. It's like one of those in the Senate where they're delaying tactic. Want to get on with this? Some of us
you can still get on with it. No, you still get on with it.
Yeah, yeah. Alan.
Yeah, my
thank you for bringing me to order there. Tom?
My question is to James, and is what do you think, and what confidence do you have in the formation of two further independent entities, and how do we manage to get proper accountability and also ensuring that overlap does not happen with such independent entities?
Well, look, I'll respond in terms of the Biodiversity Trust first of all. We have developed the trust deed with in-house legal expertise and in collaboration with the key stakeholder groups. In the trust deed, the Regional Council retains a position on the board of a trustee indefinitely, so we will have a visibility there, and the way the trust deed is written, it's either myself or my nominee. And so we'll ensure that we've got visibility into the trust's accounts and the trust's activities. There's nothing like the Hawke's Bay Biodiversity Trust in existence at the moment, certainly at regional scale, and I've got every confidence that the intent of everybody involved is to add to existing effort, not duplicate. So I think we've got enough visibility over that one. With respect to the Future Farming Trust, we don't yet have a trust deed, and therefore we've got the opportunity to create it, and I would expect a similar set of arrangements that while we would want it to be farmer-led, we would want to ensure that the council has some right of representation through that, and whether that's somebody from the farming community appointed on our behalf, or a councillor or a staff member, that's yet to be resolved. But we would certainly ensure that there's representation, and that the supply of accounts and audited accounts and the paper trail around any funds that we give it is adequately monitored and reported on. So I don't see that as a problem. With respect to duplication, I think that's all in the design, and just ensuring that we're not crowding out the efforts by others, and if anything, we're crowding effort into Hawke's Bay.
The Future Farming Trust, is to be farmer-led or consultant-led?
Farmer-led.
Yes, I'm going to, I'm going to move the recommendations with an amendment that's about to appear at the. You want to vote, and separate the future farming. So where is it? On page 97. There's going to be a 1, 2, 3. The 3 is going to be slightly amended so as to permit clarity and the ability to vote on each of the elements. Yeah, I think that's fine. That would be the suggestion. So we vote on the second. So that is what I am.
Can you move added biodiversity as well, because that was the original, at number 4, please?
Okay. We'll move 1, 2, and 3.
No. Move the whole lot. I moved the whole lot. But we're going to take them up separately. So, but I will speak specifically to number 3, since that seems to be the one of contention there. I've never quite seen so much attention over what seems to be a pretty straightforward proposition, which revolves around using our best local talent, growers, farmers, and farm advisors, Councillor, who are united in believing that we have an opportunity to lift the bar for this sector in this region, using local talent, using experience with practices that are proven to be effective and could be effective in this region, and so forth, with something that is clearly led by the community, not by Tom Belford, which is what some of our councillors seem to be fearful of. This is the outcome of a series of several meetings with a wide range of participants, probably fairly, I could say, representing all quarters of the community, from the ultimate mainstreamers to folks who are, depending on your perspective, on the either cutting edge or on the fringe. And I think what they are all interested in, and part of the reason why this proposal has been structured the way it is they're all united around wanting to push for innovations that both enable better farm outcomes environmentally, but also better farm outcomes from a productivity and profitability standpoint. And there are plenty of examples of that happening around New Zealand. There are plenty of examples of it happening here in Hawke's Bay. And those don't get very much attention. They don't get any continuity of support. Yes, we have sector programs some of them only recently aborting. They tend to be template programs for the entire country with box ticking and so forth to meet, in some cases, lowest common denominator performance objectives. So a lot of people who are doing better than that, including better than that here in Hawke's Bay, don't regard those programs as being particularly demanding or meaningful to actually moving the ball forward at the pace and on the scale that it needs to be moved forward to make some real change. And so, yes, there's a range of opinion. The more, I guess, conservative elements of the farming community are concerned that, oh my God, there might be some wacky people who take over agribusiness in Hawke's Bay, and God forbid that would happen. But on the other hand, we have people like Peter Kay, who chairs the rural board for the Hastings Council, who sits on the tank group, who I've discussed this proposition with, who's, to Peter's point, he is the leader really of the sheep and beef community around the tank process, which is moving toward collective accountability for what they're doing, and agrees that there is a need for some catalysts. There's a need for some intellectual leadership as to what could be best practice here in this region. How do we get that in front of people on a continuous basis, not with the occasional awards program? The occasional awards program is what has been done and isn't getting the job done at this point. And so we do need to put something in on top of that. There are, old farts involved in supporting this, like Steve Smith, who is the Chancellor of Lincoln University, who has on a number of occasions encouraged this proposition. So I think there's a wider range of support for this, despite the fact that some efforts have been made to drum up the sense that, those in the know don't agree with this. Those in the know have had their turn, and they haven't done it well enough. And so we need to move beyond that. That's what this proposition is about. And there are plenty of people in Hawke's Bay who are engaged in farming and growing stuff, who know they can do better and would like to see the region as a whole do better, and would like to see a vehicle that this council is aligned with that will champion that kind of change and leadership. So on that basis, I move 1, 2, and 3. And 4, but...
I'm just wondering how, we've got one motion, how we vote on...
Taking a stand.
Just taking a stand. Okay, 1, 2, 3, and 4.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to make two points in regard to this this paper and these recommendations. The first is to acknowledge that we are setting a course of action for the next 10 years around partnerships for change. I think that's crucial to understand and recognise that this is a very significant step forward by the Council entering partnerships. We've had them before, we've got them currently available, but this in particular in regard to the environment is absolutely essential. A couple of points to make about partnerships, and they've already been referred to this morning, Mr. Chair, is the probity and oversight that is now required for this council to ensure they deliver what they say they're going to deliver, and that there is some sort of time limit and expectation of ratepayer funding to fund them. We've had the spectacle in the last 3 months in regard to our plan around our current partnership, in particular in regard to tourism, with an expectation that the funding would continue forever, that there would be no let-up in it, and that we would not scrutinise that. Well, there is news for all our partners. We will. This is ratepayers' money, and we need to look, shepherd it through as best we can. Therefore, the agreements we reach with our partners need to reflect the realities of ratepayer funding available to them. The second point I'd like to make, Mr. Chair, relates to our partnership with the Biodiversity Foundation. Those attending the launch 2 nights ago, will come to an inevitable conclusion that the time has come for this region to step up its biodiversity efforts. It was wonderful to hear the very sobering commentary from Bruce Clarkson from the Waikato in regard to, and the context he put this region in. We're in the red zone. We're on the edge, probably past the edge, of saving vital biodiversity in the region. The steps that can be taken from this new foundation are a start on that journey to mobilise the entire population of Hawke's Bay in focusing on the vital biodiversity that we need to preserve. The thing about the meeting 2 nights ago was the attendance of a broad swath of Hawke's Bay people. I think if we'd held this discussion or held the same event 5-10 years ago, there'd be a small crowd of wild enthusiasts, and that would be it. Now we have, I believe, we're on the cusp of a major breakthrough across the region, and this council can take some credit for that we've been a party to a wide, sector-wide movement to improve our biodiversity. All of our respective strategies and policies that we've outlined in this long-term plan aid and abet a much better outcome for biodiversity in the region. I think part of the exercise or part of the challenge for the Biodiversity Foundation as our partner is to bring on board key players, for example, the Napier City Council, Hastings District Council, Wairau and Central Hawke's Bay, to participate in that, to consider their resources, to collectively come to a conclusion that we need to plant at least 10% of the region in order to pull ourselves back from the precipice of disaster in terms of biodiversity. The resources are there, the opportunities are there, and this, in my view, is probably the most critical partnership that this council will enter into in the next 10 years. Supersedes in purpose and outcome for $250,000 directly operational funding for the foundation. Compare that to 1.8 million currently spent for Tourism Hawke's Bay, and you get a sense that the priorities do need to change. This long-term plan and this partnership are a part of that process of restoring the balance where it needs to be.
Oh, just to say, without labouring the point, fundamentally I'm not against the trust or a trust, but and I tend to agree with a lot of the commentary around it, but I don't see why the ratepayer should have to pay for it, quite simply, for the first instance anyway. Setting up a trust is simple. You get an administrator to start applying for funding, and before you know it, you've got 50 grand in the bank and you are away. If it is worth doing, people will support it, the money will come in. I just can't see how, certainly the first year, setting it up should be a ratepayer burden. Sure, it's only 150,000 and so many million, but there's a point to be discussed here, and I don't think we've had that discussion, so I can't support it. In regard to number 4, biodiversity, biosecurity, the leverage funding, yeah, that's pretty cool. There's a lot of money just sitting there ready to come in, and I'm not going to name the oil company that's participating, but I'd like to thank them. Their proactive and forward-thinking industry support for biodiversity in Hawke's Bay, and long may it continue.
Thank you, Chair. I think I'll be really quick then. Yep. Oh, look, I see.
Try and kick that out Smoko again. It's the union man.
When I look at the challenges that have been presented to our communities around the plan changes that we're bringing through, like Plan Change 6 and the tank and everything else like that, and certainly the response that we had from the farming folk down in Central Hawke's Bay kind of indicate, and going to the Balance and Farm Environmental Awards field day, where the guy said that essentially, even though he used the Balanced Farm Environmentalist of the Year, he wouldn't be able to comply with Plan Change 6. We've got some real challenges in front of us. And if the Future Farming Trust is able to come up with solutions to those challenges that have been presented to the agriculture community, well then I'm all for it, because I think that's, to me, that's where the benefit is really going to start kicking in for us. With respect to the biodiversity and biosecurity, I'm stoked to see that initiative, and long may it continue.
One of the most important issues that's facing our community at the moment is Mycoplasma bovis, and that has not been brought up at all around this table, and yet we're discussing biosecurity initiatives and future farming initiatives. Well, in reality, we're facing the most difficult and challenging outbreak of a biosecurity incursion that New Zealand's seen for a very long time, and it's having huge social and environmental and economic consequences on many, many families. So, quite frankly, throwing in this future farming thing's just a red herring, and it's taking away the focus from what we're trying to do, which is building our land management team, our staff, our capability, and the catchment by catchment based work that we're doing. Instead, we're debating something that's quite frankly a nonsense. It's already been levied and paid for from the farming community, and in the likes of beef and lamb, 14Z, commodity levy paying bodies. And one of the big risks is that the farming community not only will be paying double, but they may well be coming up with conflicting information. We've had a number of leading people in the community who've come out strongly in opposition to this future farming, and a number of them have had their names being cited as being in support of it, when in actual fact they're not, when you have the opportunity to ask them. And Steve Wynne-Harris is a classic. He said, well, you'd better not be using my name as a referee for spending public money, because I've made it very clear I'm against it. And there are so many people like that. So now we've had another couple of names thrown in today, and quite frankly, after the last few I've checked out, I'd be sceptical if that was actually true as well. So I think that we should be focusing on the catchment collectives and the initiatives and the land management team, and leave the future farming to the groups that are already been funded to do it, and just focus on the important stuff, you know, like biosecurity incursions and things that are really having a terrible impact on local families and throughout the country. One of the other things with future farming is that if you look at the realities of how you need some other tools in the toolbox, things like GE are a future farming tool, and is that a debate we want to be getting around on the table here? Water storage is a future farming initiative, and this council has been clearly divided over that. So, you know, there's so many new technologies coming. Let's leave that stuff to the people that are doing it and get on with our regulatory role here that we should be doing in enabling community growth through all the other important things.
Well, firstly, I would say to Tom Belford, a wiser person than me said, it's wrong to be right too soon. And I think on this, you're in that category. I think this is a good initiative. I support it because it's long term. It's not talking about the immediate things we have problems of today. It's talking about the long term. And I support it for this very important reason. I had a course some years ago to go through quite a number of the research institutes we had, including those associated with agriculture. And one of the scientists there said to me that they had the research and the technologies to improve farm production dramatically. He was talking about 80 or 90%. And I said, well, why haven't we? And he said, well, the simple reason is farmer take-up. He said, of all the things that we know, only a small amount of it gets translated into everyday activity on the farm. So there's a lot of knowledge which is known but not used. And I think this trust would be key in making sure that we have the transference of knowledge from within, wherever source it comes to, across the area. Of course, people are going to say it's wrong. People said it was wrong to stop smoking in bars. They predicted gloom and doom. But who today would say they're going to reinstate smoking in bars? Never do that. The fact is, sometimes things are unpopular at the time, but just have to go and do them, because the arguments that people put up do not stack up. And I think this is one where, for a small amount of money, this council can show leadership in doing what it's doing best, which is most important about, and that is helping manage the land and the environment. We want farmers to be the best that they can be, and this is a tool that will be, in my view, help us achieve that. And if we don't do this, we'll be derelict in our duty. And I support Tom's initiative 100%. I think it's visionary, and he's to be congratulated from it, despite what the naysayers say.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, this 10-year plan with its massive new programs and new expenditure, in my view, is too big a bite too soon. And whilst future farming is not an overly significant portion of that, and Tom, I know that your motives are totally commendable, I can't support it because I just don't believe that we can afford it, and there's just got to be a little bit of trimming done somewhere.
Are there any other speakers before I revert back to Tom? So I'll just say a short note. I support this initiative as well, because I think our traditional people are moving in a traditional way, and they're moving in the right direction, and it's great that they are. And there's many great innovators out there that are moving a lot faster and achieving great results. But I want to see some thinking much higher than all this. I want to see some people get together and challenge what our farms will look like in 15 years, in 5 years even, because I think the disruptive influences in the market are going to really challenge our agricultural sector. And I don't think we're ready. I don't hear the discussions going on, even amongst our intelligentsia, such as they are, or amongst any communities. I just don't hear the discussion going on about what's happening with science and technology around the world and how that will influence our community, which is largely based on farming. And I do want to get those discussions going, because I think part of our responsibility is to say, how do we protect, not only protect, but how do we ensure that our economy grows over the next 20 years. We don't want to be the new Motorola. We don't want, and we want to learn the lessons of BlackBerry and all those stunning companies that survived for a while, but whose technology just got usurped. And guess what? Farming technology hasn't changed for 200 years, really, not really. It has moved in a direction, but it hasn't had a fundamental change, and perhaps it doesn't need it. There'll be greater minds than mine who will want to wrap their head around this, but it certainly, we need to go through the thinking process of where we're going to be. So that's why I support this, and I want to see some real innovation come out of it. Real innovation, not just do we put 3 cows or 4 cows per hectare. So, Tom, I'll hand it over to you.
Well, again, without in any way diminishing the importance of item 4 in this resolution, I don't think there's any real question about that particular element of this, so I'm going to come back to the Future Farming Initiative. And I'm just going to remind you that in the flurry of workshops and so forth that we held as we began to put this plan together, there was a document prepared that did outline exactly what this initiative was all about. I suspect that no one other than myself read it, so I'm going to read 2 paragraphs of it only. One is establish an independent farmer-grower-led initiative to support the improved resilience of Hawke's Bay natural resources communities and farmers-growers. The initiative will develop active partnerships and funding relationships with additional stakeholders alongside HBRC while maintaining improved natural resource management outcomes as a core purpose. These partnerships will include organizations and institutions at regional and national levels, effectively creating a center of excellence for sustainable land management and agricultural innovation in Hawke's Bay. Develop an evidence base from leading Hawke's Bay farmers-growers who are achieving positive, balanced, and integrated outcomes for their land, businesses, and quality of life in order to efficiently and credibly develop options for change that are relevant to Hawke's Bay contexts. Pretty straightforward proposition. I want to I don't feel it needs any further defense. What does need defense is the questioning of my integrity. I'll up the ante. I'll give you another name, Scott Lawson, one of the best organic farmers in Hawke's Bay, a leader, a recognized leader in his community who was actually submitted on behalf of this proposition when it was first mooted 3 years ago. As a part of the annual plan process of this council. For you, Councillor Hewitt, to propagate the notion that I have said misleading things about individuals, I'll take you individual by individual, as I did with Bruce Willis and Mr. Hunter the other night at the Biodiversity meeting, and clarify exactly what has been said to the agreement of Mr. Wills, okay? And I'll go through any one of these with you. And if you want to continue down this path,
Tom,
you're picking the wrong fight.
Point of order.
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, let's just, I think it's all been said. It's all been said. We're moving on to the votes. We're not going to have any points of order around it. It's all been said. Okay, we're moving 1, 2, and 3, and 3 is the future farming. So
No, 1, 2,
1,
1, 2, and 4.
1, 2, and 4. Okay, hang on, wait a minute. Oh, you've changed it up from my direction. Okay. 1, 2, and 4. We'll move that first. All those in favour of 1, 2, and 4? Aye. Against? It's unanimous. So now we're moving number 3, which has been moved down a bit. Those who agree with the Future Farming Initiative or not, we'll move that separately. All those in favour? Aye. Against? You want? Division. You want division? All those in favour? We'll get that. All those against? Thank you very much. We'll stop for a cup of tea. It is carried.